All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. Um, as we were getting ready for today, it was hard to imagine that we're really only into the second month of the year. And there's already just been so much sadness and so many tragedies in a really very short period of time. And just at the end of January, on Saturday, the 28th, I had the opportunity to be at two important vigils that really focused on some of the things that have happened. One a little closer in time than the other, but the first was in Belmont, where we were honoring the life of Henry Tapia. And for those of you who may not remember, Mr. Tapia was murdered in Belmont after a traffic encounter. It was 2 years ago in January. And after there was a sort of traffic incident, other driver got out, really used terrible racial language, escalated, and he ultimately drove his car over Mr. Tapia, killing him just a few hundred feet from his home. That case is going to trial in April. And as tragic as it is, I think one of the things that's very heartening, and I see Catherine here, and Catherine was, knows how really it was, I think, something that has changed in a good way. A lot of the conversations in town, for a town that probably would have said they didn't ever expect that sort of thing would happen there, and the kind of conversations, and Kimberly says too, the kind of conversations that have happened and the work that has been done. It is tragic that it had to be done, but I think there has been an incredible change in the community in that 2-year period. And both Catherine and Kim have really done a lot of that work, led a lot of that work. So yes, they do deserve a big shout out. And the second was, I was in Chinatown at a vigil to remember the victims of the shootings at Half Moon Bay in Monterey Park in California. And just the devastating effect of those two shootings, taking a total of 18 lives. And, we were talking yesterday about, in the context of overdoses, when you think of somebody losing their life that way and then start multiplying out the circle of people that are affected, and then you think of 18 people in a couple of days and multiply out how many connects each one of them had. It is a staggering number. And we are only 5.5 weeks into the new year, and we have already had in the United States close to 50 mass shootings. And remember, a mass shooting is defined by the FBI as a circumstance where at least 3 to 4 people die, not including the shooter. That is what is classified as a mass shooting. And we have had close to 50 in not even 50 days, which is staggering. And it just reminds us again of the devastation that's happening with these guns, particularly with assault weapons, and the need to really be taking seriously some of the new gun legislation. And we live in a world here where we think because we have serious gun laws in Massachusetts, it can't happen here. And yet we see over and over again, people having those guns, people being able to buy the ghost guns, and the kind of circumstances that, I think we are very fortunate that we have not had an incident here. It is not that we are somehow special. And I think we need to continue to be vigilant around these gun issues. And then on top of that, the incidents that led to the vigils, we had the release of the video of the Tyree Nichols Memphis incident at the hands of the police officers. And I joined with my fellow DAs across the country and law enforcement in speaking of the disgust, the outrage, the disappointment that we felt at seeing that. We heard the president talk about that the other night. And, I think for me, the most disheartening piece around this was I thought that George Floyd was a watershed moment. I thought that we saw things on video that people were clear and thought we're going to make changes. You know, I see Representative Lewis here in Massachusetts. We certainly took steps to address all those things, so many things that came up as discussions, chokeholds and things like that. And then to see a very similar incident happen again, it leaves you with that sense of where do we need to go next? What are the issues that we should be thinking about? And the fact that given the number of these violent incidents, given the things happening with police, the fact that clearly we have not yet come up, and we've seen this here. We've seen it in this county. We saw it in Easton, Massachusetts, Easton, the town this weekend. We're in a mental health crisis. We clearly don't have enough care available for people. We have people exhibiting very concerning behavior, particularly kids. I mean, our schools are overwhelmed with the things that are happening, both around mental health, around hate. You know, people probably saw the incident in Wellesley this week. We're now requiring parents to go to the basketball games with kids because of the way they're behaving. And so the response was nobody went to the basketball game, which I think was even more concerning when they showed that empty gym. And parents pretty clearly putting out posts saying they don't understand what the problem was or why they were required to go with their kids and objecting to the school. And so when you think about everybody, both kids and adults, seeing that constant, violent, discriminatory, sexualized trauma, seeing it depicted everywhere, we know that that shapes the way people are responding. Then you look at first responders who, in the Nichols case, are engaging in that behavior. But then you have first responders, for instance, with the woman in Easton this weekend, who we have a 911 call, a mental health call for somebody who's engaging in self-harm that results in someone being dead at the hands of the police officers. So we clearly have not come up with the right model. And we've talked a lot about it. We've certainly done a lot of legislative work on some of these issues. The Globe editorial today is talking about, you know, how do we do better? And how do we address that? And these are some of the things that I'm hoping we're bringing here, that we're really talking about and thinking about using in our communities. And we're very fortunate today to have Kevin Chang, a licensed social worker, with us from New Britain, Connecticut. He has been very outspoken about the targeted attacks on the Asian community. He's been an advocate for what we so desperately need, affordable access to mental health. Massachusetts stands no differently than Connecticut, where we see that bias and discrimination and hate really don't stay within any geographic boundaries. And Kevin is the on-site behavioral health director for the New Britain and Enfield Community Health Center, which is located in New Britain. He moved to Hartford, the Hartford area, from Taiwan in 2012. Decided to settle in that area after graduating from the University of Connecticut School of Social Work in 2014. From 2014 to 16, Kevin served as a clinician and eventually the lead clinician at Community Renewal Team in Hartford, and oversaw the agency's contract with the federal government's probation office, providing forensic behavioral health services. And in his current role at the Community Health Center, Kevin's responsible for clinical supervision, planning, management, and oversight for all of the behavioral health services at New Britain and Enfield sites. He was the first in his family to graduate from college, earning a bachelor's degree in social work from, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Soochow University in Taiwan, and a master's degree in social work and business administration from the University of Connecticut. He's been a licensed clinical social worker in Connecticut since 2016. And with both his personal journey coming to the United States and the compassion that he has recognizing the need for quality mental health and well-being. He's been involved on a range of Asian American and Pacific Islander issues, especially as they relate to immigrants and to immigration issues. In 2013, he served as the chair for the Asian and Asian American Student Organization at UConn's School of Social Work. In 17, he served as the university specialist for the School of Social Work to provide a support group for international students for their life adjustment during their first year of study here. And from 2017 to 20, Mr. Chang served as the treasurer for the Asian Pacific American Coalition of Connecticut. So we are very grateful, Kevin, that you're here with us today. And I will also add, which always makes me doubly grateful, we had a speaker who had a family emergency and couldn't be here, and Kevin very graciously at the last minute offered to step in and help us. So I think it's particularly appropriate, and especially for some communities. I know in Belmont, we'll be celebrating the Chinese New Year again on Sunday with events in the center. Some other communities are doing the same as well. So particularly appropriate that we be thinking about, you know, the AAPI community is another group that really is very resilient, but they have suffered from a great deal of these, and a great number of these incidents in recent years. So Kevin, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, and just a little thoughts based on, you know, the wonderful remarks that you just made. You know, again, hate crimes, gun violence, all of this are not just targeting and affecting one single group in this community or in this country, right? Everyone is being basically equally affected by that. Everyone's going through the similar level of pain. And so really, you know, I'm glad to be here talking about more like my personal experience, and then going through my involvement in the community, and also my education, my experience, clinical experience as well, kind of working with the community. I also just want to talk a little bit, probably close to the end of my presentation today. I had a chance to speak with one of my colleagues who works in Massachusetts at Quincy Asians Resource Incorporation, and she also kind of just, you know, want me to bring some words for maybe the future policy planning, as well as some recommendation for healthcare access. So again, very wonderful, and it's a high honor to be here. And I am going to share my screen. Can everyone see it? Yeah, okay, perfect. Right. So just thinking about what I want to bring to you today, and also maybe have a brief conversation with you today, is it's about mental health and AAPI community. And this is just such an important thing. And then I'm so glad that to see everyone who cares about this topic, is because we know, you know, anti-Asian hate crime has increased a lot ever since the pandemic started. As a matter of fact, last year they conducted a research and kind of just like survey, you know, information collections, that anti-Asian hate crime has increased close to 339% from the year before. And we already know back in 2020, you know, the anti-Asian hate crime already increased. So there is an urgency that we kind of bring this topic to the community. And it's interesting, you know, and just again, I'm grateful that, you know, 2 years ago, I got a chance to kind of also speaking about it, and then, you know, gaining more interest. And I'm in general I'm feeling like the community is becoming more and more interest to learn about like, particular issues around, our AAPI community. And also, another factor is that's also continue increasing, I think a lot of anti-Asian racism or behavior is like the political tensions today, right? I was watching news the other day and there are kind of in San Francisco, there's also a lot of people reporting that being kind of harassed verbally because the kind of the spy balloon and that, I think the tension between China and US kind of also causing a lot of internal pressure that kind of between different racial group. So I think that's also why it is important for us to kind of just talk about what's going on and then, the mental health care for AAPI community. And, the third one, which is very unfortunate, we're kind of diving a little later is that we API community is the least likely to make any kind of report on hate crime or any problem. I think this is connected to the system and also the culture behind it. So I think it is important to talk about today, bring up a history about some mental health issues that we have, and then talking about the care, and then talk about how we, each of us can deal and handle when we see anti-hate crime situations, or what can we do kind of like behind the scene to really supporting the system to be, better. I would like to start by giving you all a brief history of me. And this is a picture of when I was born and with my mother. I was born in Flushing, Queens, Flushing, New York. And then, I think my parents, they really tried to settle over here in Queens and they just didn't like it. And so eventually they make a decision like moving back to Taiwan. So although I was born here, I spent most of my childhood in Taiwan. And, I grew up in a well-protected, loving family. I went to a university there. But I think like during that time, right, from my, birth to 22 years old, I didn't really have a lot of like, I guess stress. I think my parenting, or my parents' parenting style was very kind of like free. I was giving a lot of flexibility to decide like what I want to do. Um, and then I think there's a series of like stories that happen when I kind of first migrate over here or move over here, that kind of like what I call a transformation stage. And then, what I want to give you today is probably in different stage, certainly over the past, um, I've been here for a little bit over 10 years. And then I have to say, I have received not really direct, let's say, assault, physically or verbal, but I think my experience dealing with a lot of like microaggressions also, it's almost like very frequently, if not daily, is probably on a weekly basis. But I kind of just want to kind of sharing a few of them with you. So again, as I mentioned, I travel or move from Taiwan to the United States back in 2012. And I spent some time with my family in New York. I do have a lot of family members in New York. And then during that time, I worked part-time as a tour guide for a Chinese travel company. I was leading them about, take them to like New York City and introducing them about the city, taking them to different restaurants. But I guess like in general, I start feeling a lot of internal pressure from my own family, right? You have to do good, right? This is the only way you can succeed in this country. You have to work harder than everybody else so that you can get a same position, with other people. And so I didn't know, I was naive, right? That was my first month over here. So really had no idea what was going on. And then, why are they sitting me down and then just giving me all these speech that I have to hear it over and over again. And that's caused like a lot of confusion and stress. But, all my cousins, right? Like they seems like very used to it. And then going into my study, I was like choosing what major. I really want to get into social work for community organization, kind of doing something I really want to, find it meaningful. And then, here we come and a lot of family internal voices or internal ideas that, oh, you shouldn't really go to social work because it wouldn't really give you a very good income, right? You should really consider computer science, dietitian, nutrition, accountant, the business major, and all that kind of a lot of suggestions really didn't kind of match what I really wanted to do. So it's actually increasing a lot of family conflicts over that, especially during that time I was living with them. But eventually I got admitted by University of Connecticut School of Social Work. I was grateful, and that's how I make the move from New York City to Hartford, Connecticut. And I think after I graduated, I've been just trying to staying over there. But I think also as an Asian student in over here, a lot of my friends there just had a different major from me, right? So I guess like when I was building social capital in the process, I also met a lot of difficulties. Most of my faculty are non-Asian, so it didn't really have like a role model over there. A lot of time I have to kind of reach out to a community member and to see, how can we kind of working successfully as a social worker? What are some career paths? Didn't really have a very strong guidance, but I was appreciated that the school, they try their best to provide all the information I need, connecting with different community members. And then here we are into like kind of working my career life. I think still work environment, microaggressions, it's also happened, unfortunately, frequently to me. Probably, I constantly being pointed out or, just, being treated as a foreigner. I work here, but it doesn't seem like I belong here. Probably because the way I speak, my accent, and also on my background, right? I remember there was one time I was just sitting with a couple of my colleagues and having lunch. And I was just like telling them, sharing about my story about, oh, I was born in New York, but mostly raised in Taiwan. And then all of a sudden, one of the coworkers just make a comment to that. I didn't know what I mean, but they call me an anchor baby. And I just feel, I didn't know what I mean, right? At the moment, I had to do a lot of research afterwards. But this happened like pretty frequently to me at the workplace, especially during the earlier of my career. And then neighbor is about the same thing. This is one example, maybe from 2 or 3 years ago. I live in a apartment complex, and then we occasionally will have like new neighbors, welcoming party and stuff like that. I remember I just approached a new neighbor and introducing myself, and she kind of just like wasn't really interested in other background or my work experience or my life over here. She was just really into that, where are you coming from, right? Like, where are you originally coming from? Where are your parents coming from? Like, she was like running a list of that kind of questions, and that didn't really make me feel comfortable. I feel like living until that time, it's my 7, 8 years into United States. I was already fine with that. So I handle it, but other neighbors also saw that. And then, checking with me, I feel grateful, but it just creating a sense of pressure for the entire group. And then we are into COVID, right? I think everyone's going through the similar thing. We all know someone that we lost. We all know that how scary it was to be isolated. And on top of that, I have to deal with, a lot of these fear, not knowing what's going on, a lot of violence towards Asian, but we can't really reach out to anyone to talk to. So basically just staying isolated and process it through myself. And then I think that was also very extremely difficult. So yeah, that's just a little kind of story about me, and then why is it important and tie into what I feel very passionate about. I constantly advocating for mental health, wellness in the Asian community is because from other side, right? It's from outside, it's really not providing a good support. From the inside, there's a lot of stigma. And then also constantly have to work through it with a lot of our, my clients' parents or my clients themselves. So although like we know the anti-Asian hate crime has been increasing over the past 2-3 years, this is definitely not the first time that we have something go against with the AAPI community. It goes way back probably to late 19th century. Kind of just give you a few examples here. The Page Act of 1875, which is probably the first restrictive immigration law against particularly Chinese women, because Chinese women during that time was seen as a threat to white men's sexuality, and then also the racial purity idea. And the second one is the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. So basically they prevent all Chinese men or women from entering the country, and they, for at least for 10 years, and then they prohibit everyone from getting naturalized to be American citizen. And the second factor I want to bring up is like after World War II, Asian children and family are seeing particular dangers. And this actually tie into another idea I really want to bring in today, which is the model minority myth, right? But this is a history connection. After World War II, Asian children and family were seen very dangerous. And then by that time, Asian population, because they want to stay, so they have to be good, right? So they have to kind of presenting some evidence to the white people at that time that we are suitable for this country, don't kick us out. So they start kind of like just doing a lot of being the model citizen type of thing, like trying to fit in to the system, and which is later on the model minority myth has kind of just become established. And well, I think before I jump into talking more about model minority myth, feel free to use chat if you have any questions, comments. We're not going to get into now, but I think hopefully by the end of my presentation, I will have a chance to, using that to communicate with you. All right, so I want to speak a little bit more about model minority myth. It's a concept that first established by sociologist William Peterson, and based on what he described, the characteristic of Asian, describe it as obedient, submissive, and successful in simulating into American culture. Particularly, in his article, particularly he was describing Japanese American. And again, also a lot of stereotypes and cultural expectation on each Asian American. It's constantly being considered as smart, wealthy, hardworking, and never really in need for help. And then which is also speaking why when we talk about healthcare system or public welfare system, why Asian community a lot of time, AAPI community a lot of time are being overlooked. And then also this myth has certainly creating both external as well as internal pressure. That's certainly kind of something affecting us a lot, even us today. I think still a majority of us still kind of struggling with it. We're dealing with that within family and within community. So speaking a little bit more on how it's affecting us from the outside, how this model minority myth affecting AAPI community from the outside. I think as a beginning of my presentation today, I kind of make that this is my personal story, right? Because I think living over here, the general society try to singulate all Asian groups into one. And that's actually what's causing problem. What I'm going through as a Taiwanese American is certainly different from someone who is from like South Asia, where, in South Asia, there's a few countries here, or Southeast Asia. Every country, every culture, like, is somewhat different in between. And then they all have like different kind of history and also different intergenerational traumas that we are all processing for. So, but that created a problem, right? Grouping all Asian into one group and assuming everyone is successful. And that's a false belief. There is a lot of like Asian subgroups who are not fitting into criteria, even though that's not majority, it's a minority, but they still being overlooked in the system. Especially I know Mon in particular, Burmese, and that these are a couple particular community that they struggle financially, they struggle, first generation struggle language wise, food security, they have a lot of problem with basic needs. And again, there's not a lot of systematic support that we can provide it to them as today. And also microaggression, model minority myth. Even though, as I mentioned earlier in my interaction with neighbor, even though like what she was saying, not necessarily like very like negative or assaulting, but it is a microaggression, right? Those questions is leading to a negative consequences inside of me, like it's creating a bad taste, and also feelings. So microaggression, a lot of time, we're being called smart, we're being called, oh, wealthy, oh, we got it. A lot of time we don't, right? But because the community expecting that, sometimes also creating a sense of pressure. And the final thing is a lack of role model and representation and leaders role. We are constantly considered a really good worker. We have no problem to be hired to work at somewhere, but we're not necessarily considered as good leaders. And that could also creating a problem with underrepresentation. I kind of have a graph over here, and this is something I retrieve from NPR, and saying how many the differences between elected leaders. And you can see like among all people from different background, Asian is the least likely to be elected as a leader into the office. And so this is kind of just a situation that's happening today. But again, we don't have a problem to get a job, but how are we going to move up? There is almost like a double ceiling. From the inside, identity crisis and peer pressure. This is something I want to certainly stress a little bit more in this page. I think growing up, I never really heard it, but living over here for the past 10 years, I have many of my Asian friends told me they describe themselves as banana, meaning that white skin outside, but they consider themselves as a white person inside. And when I'm hearing that, it just creating such an interesting feeling in me. And also just saying that how confusing it is, where it could be in a lot of situation. A lot of them, most of them, most people I know, they grow and got into a process of denial. They rejecting their own parents, they rejecting their own names, they rejected their own look. Right. So that also, but they can't, right? Because how they see themselves is so different from how the society see them. They want to see themselves in a different way, but the society consider themselves as yeah, I'm Asian, So that also kind of creating a problematic identity development, especially for second, third, fourth generation of immigrant. For first generation, also, as I mentioned in my career, right? I work here, but I don't feel like I belong here. And, I constantly being treated as a foreigner, even though, I want to be treated one of them, but that's a ceiling where there's a wall that constantly blocking me outside. Cultural belief is also a very classic one. Like we need to be successful, and successful people should be able to take care of ourselves and our family. Now, the meaning of taking care of ourselves, meaning that we shouldn't really have any mental health issues, because having mental health issues is considered as a sign of weakness. Intergenerational trauma is also another one. As I mentioned, for decades, we're trying to really be model citizen, but that also structure-wise, it creating a lot of pressure and suppressing a lot of feelings. So one is that they trying to pass these behavior to their children. Children feel distress. And another thing is because parents are often dealing with so many like emotional pain, they become emotional numb to their kids. So that's why a lot of children and youth I'm working with, they don't even know how to express themselves, which is also mentioned later that a lot of them just having this physical symptoms, somatic symptoms or conversion disorder, because they don't know how to deal with the emotional health. So eventually that transition into physical pain, constant headache, seizure, stomach ache or diarrhea. There's a lot of physical reaction that they stress on a lot more than mental health because they don't really touch mental health piece. Okay, so let's see. I have a video that I want to share with you. Uh, Short one, just 1 minute. I'm going to hit play.
There is a stereotype among Asian families about mental health issues.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm kind of curious about, the difference in that experience, and particularly what did you experience as far as bias against mental health issues in your family?
Well, my parents don't believe in depression. Well, the first time I went on antidepressants, they gave me a bag of niacin, and my dad said, depression goes away as you get older. And he advised me to go around my house and point at things and say, this is my fridge. This is my table. And he's like, it's not about the materialism, but it's about recognizing your accomplishments, which is just another stereotype of, being accomplishment driven. And in the Asian American community in particular, we're the least likely demographic to seek mental health resources. Asian American women are the second highest suicidal demographic in the United States. Right after Native American women. So there's just a lot of bias in Asian American culture about mental health and a refusal to acknowledge it. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of silence, there's a lot of interpretation that, depression is weakness, anxiety is weakness, and that to ignore that is to have honor. Since you're all here.
Cute. All right, let me come back. All right, so I want to stress on a couple of determinants of psychological health for AAPI community today. Number one, it's what I mentioned earlier, problematic identity development. A lot of their interaction with classmates, families, and again, how they see themselves is very different from how society see them. That cause a huge deal of stress. And the second is certainly also an unreasonable expectation from the inside out and then outside in as a member of the society, right? Because a model minority youth or a model minority individual, and also the family culture itself. And social isolation is kind of just because number one and two, social isolation also happened across the span of first, second, third, all type of generations immigrant. And that created a lot of sense. Like, again, from public system is not really feeling inclusive, healthcare system, school education, and that creating a big problem, right? So in a lot of social isolations, a lot of individuals struggle with social isolation, that we see a high risk of domestic violence, child abuse, as well as, gambling and other behavioral problems would come surge. So these are the common like behavioral health issues among AAPI population. We see MDD, depressive disorder, anxiety, PTSD, especially even you see children don't actually go through a traumatic event because the intergenerational traumas that I mentioned, they passed, these traumatic experience got passed on to their children in a very different way. Emotional isolations or avoiding a lot of these behavior can really be included in a PTSD side. And also ongoing constructive racism, also creating a lot of pressure and creating a traumatic sense in a lot of these individuals. Higher suicide ideation and risk. And I think as we saw in the video earlier, I think what I want to mention over here is like nationwide, suicide remain the #2 cause of death for AAPI community from age group 0 to 19 and 20 to 44. And that's a very high number if you look at comparing it with other racial group. Suicide is a #2 cause of death. And the somatic symptoms, which is I mentioned earlier, that I think a lot of Asian AAPI individuals, they don't really learn, they don't know how to express. And a lot of time they are not allowed themselves to express. So a lot of these mental, emotional distress were becoming a physical symptoms. And of course, like problem gambling. AAPI doesn't really struggle with like substance use more than, comparing with other racial group, but problem gambling is definitely one of the top. And domestic violence. And then we talk about like barriers seeking treatment and, impact for like model minority myth, what we talked about earlier from individual level, family and community, family culture. There's just a stressing on the value of being successful. And then, what happened within the family, you keep that in the family. And then what have to make a person successful is that we have to remain mental strong. And also a lot of time today is like for first generation, particularly language barrier is one factor that worsen isolation, that prevent people from seeking help. And also in today's, we do have a lot of like, I guess a lot of agency that's supporting Asian population or community. However, if an individual need higher level care, intensive outpatient, even psychiatric hospitalization, in a lot of those settings, we don't really see people can directly help them. Interpretation or language services, a lot of times still really not available for these programs. And lack of like accessible treatment option and support. It's something kind of go along the line. And another one is like their immigration status, right? Like a lot of people coming over here maybe undocumented, or they are in the process of applying green card or becoming naturalized. And then during this process, in general, people have fear of like causing problem. People generally have fear, even they become the victim, they have fear about making report to police because they fear that it will leave a record on their immigration application. Okay, it's getting close to the end of my presentation, but I want to show you a video, and then if you can go through it, watch it, and then just maybe leave one word in a comment about how you feel. That would be greatly appreciated. This is a social experiment conducted by a Japanese singer. Give me one second, I forgot to share sound. This social experiment was done probably a year ago, and I only going to show you a very, maybe just a 1 to 2 minutes of this experiment, and then let me know how you feel in a comment.
Sorry, can I ask you something?
Yeah.
So actually, I'm looking for where the McDonald's is, but I don't know where the data. I don't have a data right now. So
Looking for where? What is?
McDonald's.
McDonald's.
I don't know where it is.
Great question.
Hey, where are you from?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm from Japan.
Okay. Cool. Well, this is America, man. You should probably leave.
What do you mean?
With all this Asian virus stuff going on and us having to wear these masks, man, it's killing us. We really wish you would get out of here, man.
Is that joking?
Aren't
or?
you guys worried standing so close to them? I mean, it's screwed everything up, man. This whole pandemic thing because of your people. I just wish you guys would get out of here, man. I mean, look around. You don't fit in here. Don't you guys see that?
So sorry. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
No, you.
Yeah.
Loaded with delicious.
So maybe just quickly, after seeing that interaction, maybe leave maybe just one word about how you feel from it. Frustrated. See, awful, sad. Yeah, and relatable. It's distress. And then, I think when I was seeing this video, it's more like just how this interaction also create a sense of discomfort for the three people around him or around these two people, right? You could see even though they stood quiet, they didn't know what to say, but they just definitely feel very distressed. And that's a very classic trauma reaction, right? Like when we kind of facing something very dangerous, we kind of turn on that flight or fight, or being numb, being just not really knowing what to do. And then you can just tell, like those people, they have feeling they couldn't really react. All right. So I want to wrap it up from what are some actions that we can take, if I am experienced where someone is experiencing anti-Asian hate. And I think at the scene, we all need to kind of assessing the safety. Is it safe? Different level will have like different reaction, right? Microaggression, usually I would recommending to in a non-confrontational way, try to have a conversation with that person and letting them know, how their comment actually making me feel, and then just speaking through it and then processing it, because this is still ongoing issues. It's not going to change. It's not going to go away tomorrow. This is going to take a very, very long time. And then I think we all kind of are responsible to be part of it. And making a report, again, like the society wouldn't really know without we reporting it. So that's continually, it's my work in the community, encouraging people that if they experience something, they have to make the report. Even to the local police, or there is a hotline they can call. Really, we have to get it on the data, and then seeking help. And this is from within, continually encourage people that bring up the awareness, right? Mental health, no matter how strong we are, we all go through feelings and we all are human beings. And then what are some actions can people take to fight against AAPI hate from the outside? I think certainly if you witness something, checking in with them, and trying to apply reflective listening, they all need a room for being heard. And then I think you serving as a person, listening to them and hearing how they feel, it would be very meaningful at the scene. And then also policy planning. I think just getting more available resources for them, right? Again, I think language, and also how are we going to create an environment that make them feel comfortable seeking help. And that's also a problem nowadays, not just for the state particularly, I think any state right now, without having a work history over here, they can't really get healthcare insurance. And then again, without healthcare insurance, most of them are, I think a community health with providing sliding fee, but it still could be unaffordable for a lot of them. So that kind of become a blocker for them to seeking help for themselves and their family. And also, hopefully, in the future, we can see both vertical and horizontal representation. We need more people in the leader role, director role, and then to really making the role model for next generation and let them see, hey, we can also do it. Okay, I think I want to close my presentation by just saying I still see a lot of hopeful thing, especially the social movement of Black Lives Matter after George Floyd. I think people in general, they are moving the needles by corporate and agency paying more attention to it. So I do feel it's a very hopeful thing. And I was reading my niece's class material, and she is learning about all these history about like Chinese Exclusion Act. I think in one of the social studies, she did a project on Vincent Chin, who was mistaken as a Japanese American and got beaten to death, even though he was Chinese descent. And so like a lot of these material start getting incorporated into class material, and kind of like students and children are learning about it. I think that's very meaningful. And hopefully moving forward, again, seeing more people in a leadership role, and then also continue increasing awareness for that mental health. With that being said, thank you everyone for the time that you've given me.
Kevin, thank you so much. People have questions or comments for Kevin? Catherine.
Yes, thank you, Kevin, for this. I'm wondering, with interactions, and we know it can vary from community to community. There isn't a monolithic AAPI community, but I'm worried about interactions with the police. Certainly if somebody's immigrant status, as you mentioned, can be problematic, but also some of the culture. I'm wondering if there's specific training for police. And also, we're fortunate to have a social worker, which I think is huge on our police department. What advice you might give her in working with this community, which we have a large percentage in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very great topic to continue doing research on. I think, how are we going to build a bridge between people and the local police department is huge. I know in Connecticut, they're trying to also increasing just in general Asian police officer, and then they do a lot of outreach speaking, and they kind of just go into a community and showing their faces, trying to make people feel more comfortable that, we have Asian representation in the police force. Hopefully that bring up awareness in that way.
I think to that point, Catherine, I think particularly here in Middlesex County, I think the chiefs have tried to do a good job in terms of cultural competency training for their departments. We now have every department in Middlesex County has access to a social worker, at least it's some amount of time. I would say the cultural competence training for them is less consistent because most of them also work someplace else. And they may just work with the department one day a week or something like that. That's certainly an area we could do better at. Kim.
Hi, sorry everyone that I am off camera. So Kevin, there seems to be, there's a lot of overlap also with some minor differences, I would say, between the AAPI community and the Black and Brown community in terms of discrimination. Has there been any conversation around working together? Because it seems like, and you mentioned BLM, but at least what we see in our community, the Belmont community, is it's fragmented in terms of bringing issues to light together, right? So the communities support their own, but not necessarily each other. So has there been conversation about potentially joining forces just to look at discrimination overall against all groups, right? Because to me, that's extremely powerful to get to coalesce together versus working on our issues separately, because the issues you talked about, like familial structure issues, the failure to fully understand social emotional health, right? All of those things are happening within the Black and Brown communities as well. So I guess my question to you is, rather than focusing on one group, has there been conversation about working together to combat these issues?
That's a very good question. I think, again, speaking for only, geographic wise, I only know a little bit more on Connecticut. And then there isn't a lot of conversation about that, and, more like a collaboration role. But, we do have a lot of collaboration over other area, right? Like, let's say art, music. There is a lot of collaboration happening in that way, but not directly towards social justice and a movement.
Why do you think that is?
I think probably something you mentioned about, I think different groups are also dealing with somewhat different issues. There are some same issues that we all going through together. But also I think for the subgroup, as I mentioned earlier, for those groups who needs the most help, they are not really still connecting with the society as of today. And then I think a lot of people advocating for that group, they are asking for maybe different resources in that way.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments?
So I just had a quick question, Kevin. So as you talked about assimilating to the States when you came, do you feel over time, or as racial and social issues have happened, as we were just talking about, that there is a movement within the Asian community to kind of break down those barriers, maybe a call to action to get that mental health, because the community is now being influenced between gun violence, domestic violence, and all these other criminal activities that are affecting all of the different groups. Do you feel that there's been a shift?
Yeah, I certainly feel that way. I think my communication conversation with a lot of local community people in general has become more outgoing, outspoken about the issues, especially the younger generation. They start making a lot of content. They start kind of just increasing the community conversation about these issues and just working around it. I think a lot of us just talking about strategy we can apply within the family, right? Because a lot of parents also need help, and we're helping them to connect it with the care. So I think in general, people are being more outspoken about the issues in general. And then, again, we communicate with our thought through art, through music, in different forms, and all of these help to kind of bring a general awareness.
Hi, Kevin. Reverend Lloyd here. Appreciate your presentation. Question for you. I don't say most, well, significant portion of our society, we look at Asians and we sort of bunch everybody together, okay, without necessarily respecting a distinction between Koreans or Chinese or Japanese and what have you. Okay. Consequently, with a broad brush, we paint it and we respond. My question is, in this fight against racism that the communities are experiencing, is there the ability, or does it take place where y'all can coalesce together to fight that as Asian Americans? Or is it breaking down depending on what your historical perspective is, with your South Korean, your Korean or your whatever? What's going on in that mix?
Dr. Lloyd, thank you for that question. Yeah, I think in general, we work collaboratively together on, advocating for what we need. And then I think it's also part of things that we want to advocate for is that each of us is very different, right? There's a different cultures within the umbrella of being Asian American. And that's actually part of points that we're trying to advocate, which is meaning that we want general population to learn a little bit more about different culture. I think recent years, we do see a lot of very successful movies that talk about specific, culture, and I think using those form of communication, it's bringing into different knowledge, but in general, we work together, but also advocating that we are still different.
Thanks.
Right. Kevin, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Oh, Catherine, did you have another question?
Just really quickly, Kevin, I thought you alluded to some legislation that someone was recommending. Could you speak to that? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So my colleague who works at Quincy Asian Services, and then she just really have a couple points based on her working experience. She works as a program consultant at the agency and working primarily with first generation immigrants from China. And that a lot of time she kind of talked about something I mentioned earlier about healthcare insurance is not necessarily available to them. That's one. And also interpretation services. A lot of these population where they are seeking care, providers still not always using interpretation as a professional services. They still primarily relying on their children or their family member as interpreter, which could cause a lot of problem, right? Like boundary setting and family structure wise. Me as a son of my mom, but also that become kind of the between of communication, which could also cause some confusion. And then I think the other point she wanted me to kind of stress is also, I think just more like not enough resource to put in language and cultural specific care. Also talk about just lack of representation in mental health professional and police force, and also just social leader.
Linda, did you have a question?
I do, thank you. Kevin, thank you so much for your presentation. And I said frustrated because how many times does our country have to go through this gaslighting and bias and discrimination before people start to see how wrong it is? So my question is about the Chinese spy balloons and the anticipated and occurring backlash on our Chinese and Asian communities. And do you have any suggestions about, and the video just drove that home to me, how wrong it was for the pandemic to be blamed on our Asian community and how that just took off. And I was thinking, well, now this is happening in real time. So do you have suggestions or resources that you can recommend for our teachers, our communities to engage, to anticipate and offset this reaction?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of this was based on your or teachers' individual conversation with it. To YouTube, and then they get information that way. And a lot of time they use that to kind of bully or attack their classmates. But a lot of these will be your willingness to bring up this awareness, right? This decision wasn't made, or this thing didn't really happen, made by this person with this particular group. We are growing, we are living over here. That decision has nothing to do with us.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Kevin, you certainly gave us much to think about today. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will see you again 1 month from today, March the 9th, and we'll send out information ahead of time. Thank you so much. Thanks, Antonia. Thanks, Kevin. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.